6. Marshmallow Test. Charlie groaned and rolled over. Coffee was brewing in the other room, the scent of it making her feel incrementally more awake. Outside, someone was using a leaf blower, the sound a steady, grating thrum. Above her, the familiar dried brown rings of a water stain from their leaky ceiling formed Rorschach-like patterns. A gun, a goat, an hourglass. In tea leaves, those would all be warnings. She rubbed her face with the heel of her hand and got up. Her underpants were somewhere beneath the comforter. She found them and tossed them into the laundry pile, along with the shirt she'd slept in. Naked, she flopped face first on the mattress and took out her burner phone. She needed a better plan than the one that was just, 1, go to the MGM and disappoint Adam by not being Amber, then 2, get him to go home and disappoint Doreen by being himself. But if Adam truly had the Liber Noctum, Charlie wanted it. "I think I can get to your place by 1:15 a.m., she texted. "Leave a key at the desk and I'll just come up." Almost all hotel elevators needed keys to operate, which would mean that if she didn't have one, he'd have to come down and get her. Maybe he'd be willing to make things a little more convenient for both of them. "Okay," he texted back. "See you tonight," she wrote. As soon as she arrived at the hotel, she'd get that key. Then she'd text to say that she changed her mind and felt weird about going straight to some guy's room. The casino floor served drinks until 4 a.m. She'd suggest they meet there. He might be tired, might get frustrated by her, but she didn't think he'd give up on a job because she asked him to come downstairs first. Since she'd have his room key, she could just waltz in while he was waiting for her at the casino bar. So long as he didn't keep the book in the wall safe, she could find it, grab it, and go. And even if he did keep it in the safe, she had enough information from knowing Doreen. Kid's birthday, his birthday, wedding anniversary, to guess the obvious passcodes. Disguise wouldn't be a big deal. Charlie just wanted to look different enough that she wouldn't be noticed on security cameras, in case he got somebody at the hotel to show him the footage. She had a collection of wigs shoved in the bottom of a dresser drawer, packed in Ziplocs, for just this purpose. She tossed an auburn one into her backpack, along with a tube of distractingly red lipstick, a sparkly yet stretchy dress, and a pair of flats she could run in. Then she changed for work. A black t-shirt, skirt over bike shorts, and her trusty, ugly Crocs. So long as her Corolla could get her to Springfield and back, she might be able to have something she never thought she would. The satisfaction of taking something away from Lionel Salt. Maybe she'd destroy it and send him the twisted, melted metal remains. After she got the book, she'd dob an Adam to Doreen and let her figure out how to get him home. Charlie's body was on autopilot as she stirred bitters into old fashions, pulled drafts, and doctored abominable Smirnoff ices with half shots of Chambord. Up on the stage, a drag trio in sinister yet glittery Elvira-esque attire belted out songs from the 90s. Mixing drinks, she found herself glad of something to do with her hands, some distraction from the churn of her thoughts. In the hours before a job, adrenaline kicked in. She was alert, focused, as though she only truly came awake when there was a puzzle to solve, a potential triumph outside the grinding pattern of days. Something other than getting up, eating, going to work, eating again, and then having a few hours before bed with which you could work out, or do your laundry, or have sex, or clean the kitchen, or watch a movie, or get drunk. That grinding pattern was life, though. You weren't supposed to yearn for something else. She'd done a couple of credits at the local community college before screwing that up, too. Criminals, her ancient and slightly doddering professor declared, have no self-control. There was a test where a marshmallow was placed in front of a child. The child was told that if they can wait for the researcher to return, they will be given 2 marshmallows. The 1 marshmallow kids were the ones who were most likely to turn into criminals, who were reckless, who sought pleasure and excitement over all else, stole when they thought they could get away with it, lied when it benefited them, who chose the temporary thrill over the permanent gain. Charlie poured 3 shots of chartreuse that glowed the bright green of poison, shook up a dirty martini, dropped extra olives into the cloudy brine of the drink. Her mind went over all the things that could go wrong, and she thought of the receipts in Odette's office, one of them revealing the name of the dead guy who wanted to fence those pages from the Liber Noctum. If he was the one holding the rest of the book, with Adam in charge of moving it, she was screwed. It wouldn't be at the hotel. But if she knew the dead guy's name, she could hit his place next. Maybe she hadn't changed much after all. If someone had put a marshmallow in front of her as a child, she would have eaten it straight away, because adults couldn't be trusted to keep their promises. At 10, Charlie got a half-hour dinner break. It was her chance to pee and scarf something down before she was back on until 1, with just one more 15-minute break between. Usually, she went a few blocks over to Daikaiju for ramen. But tonight, she walked to the convenience store on the corner and got microwavable mac and cheese, a container of sad-looking grapes, and a coconut water. She drank the coconut water on the way back, tossing the container in the garbage before she passed through the large black double doors of Rapture. She headed straight to the break room. Although technically part of the backstage, it had a microwave and a place to sit. Since the performers were on stage, there was no one to object to her being there. She made her way to a satiny pink sofa that looked only slightly moth-eaten. Makeup cluttered a long mirrored counter. Shimmery stage outfits hung on a garment rack that bowed in the middle, as though about to collapse beneath their weight. A hook on the wall held a few abandoned garments, including a deep red satin pantsuit that Charlie coveted, waiting for their owners to come and retrieve them. A small side table next to the sofa held a dirty cream landline phone. The main area of Rapture, including the bar and the stage, wasn't all that large. You could get perhaps 100 people in, packed tightly together. Although if you counted Balthazar's basement shadow parlor, you could probably cram in 30 more. Only one hall ran into the back, leading to the dressing room where Charlie's mac and cheese spun on the glass microwave plate. Directly across from it was the large metal door that led to Odette's office. Just one quick peek at the receipt, she told herself. His name wasn't a secret. Charlie had run his card through the machine. She'd given him the paper to sign and the pen to sign with. If she'd been paying more attention, she'd already know. Crossing the hall, Charlie knocked. When no one answered, she let herself inside. Wallpaper with a pattern of gleaming golden knives covered the room. A powder-coated neon purple steel desk rested in the center, a brass lamp glowing atop it. An Art Deco-style bookshelf ran along the back wall, piled with stacks of papers. Beside it was a second steel door. This one was ajar, revealing Odette's dungeon. From where Charlie was standing, it appeared to be small and well-organized, with a dog cage in one corner and a St. Andrew's cross dominating the rest of the space. Charlie liked Odette. She liked working at Rapture. Odette let her order in dry ice, infuse vodka with Meyer lemons or ginger or peppercorns in big glass vats they kept in a cool spot beneath the stage. Charlie got paid and got decent tips. And if someone gave her a hard time, they got removed. It was stupid to risk a good job for something that couldn't really matter. Even if she found the book, so what? So she'd take something away from Salt, but it would be nothing like what he took from her. But even as she thought that, her fingers were digging through the receipts on Odette's desk. Charlie Hall, failing the marshmallow test. No impulse control. Curious as a cat on crack. And there it was. 4 roses, $4.25. He'd added a 50-cent tip, which sucked, but whatever. Speak no ill of the dead. Paul Echo. Charlie stuffed the receipts back into the neon purple envelope and zipped it up, repeating his name in her head. She grabbed a pen and was about to retreat back to the break room to write it on her hand when Odette came in. She startled to see Charlie. Fuck, Charlie thought. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Charlotte? Odette asked, stern as a schoolmistress. This must be the exact tone of voice she used before she slapped the shit out of someone and then charged them for it. Sorry, Charlie said, holding up what was in her hand. I was looking for a pen. These are my pens, my dear. Odette looked no less irritated, but seemed to believe Charlie's crime was exactly what she'd said it was. Sorry, Charlie mumbled again. And I'd prefer you didn't come back here without my explicit permission. We're decadent here at Rapture and informal, but that doesn't mean there are no rules. Of course, Charlie nodded. Good, Odette said. In a way that made it clear Charlie was dismissed. She slunk from the room, entirely aware of how lucky she'd been. As she ate her sad food in the green room, slathered in hot sauce from a packet, she Googled Paul Echo on her phone. No obituary, nothing in the local news. She added book to the search and was surprised to find that the third hit listed him as a rare and antiquarian book dealer at a place called Curiosity Books. The website boasted a large online inventory and some kind of physical store in one of the East Hampton Mill buildings that saw customers by appointment only. It featured some first editions, mostly science fiction and comics, and a whole section devoted to antique magic tomes. Rare book dealers occupied an interesting position in the ecosystem of gloaming. They were the ones willing to comb through out-of-the-way used bookstores, going through piles of old musty boxes, looking for the one hidden gem. They might discover volumes that no one else even knew existed. Or they could be fences for thieves looking for the highest bidder. Of course, it was possible that Paul Echo was both a rare book dealer and a thief. But it seemed more likely that he'd been who Adam cut a deal with to move the Liber Noctum. After Echo's death, Adam would need someone else, which would have been why he'd sounded out Charlie. If that was true, Adam had probably hung on to the book, which was good news. But why was Echo bringing around a few pages if he had had access to the whole thing? Had he been playing Balthazar? Maybe she better plan to hit his place after all, which meant finding out if anyone was home. The old corded phone had a dial tone when Charlie brought it to her ear. She punched in the number of the bookshop. 2 rings, and someone answered. Curiosity Books. The voice was gruff and a little too eager. Is Paul there? Charlie asked, wondering what answer they'd give. This is him, You looking for a book? An illustrated edition of The Witch and the Unlucky Brother. Charlie improvised, heart pounding. Unless this was a different Paul Echo, the person on the other end of the line was posing as a dead man. We spoke about it yesterday? Yesterday. A day after he would have been murdered. Yeah, the man said. Some boxes just came in, so I'll have to look through the inventory and get back to you. Why don't you give me your name and number? He paused, waiting for Charlie to supply the rest. The problem with phones and caller ID was that he very probably had Rapture's number already, so the only thing left to lie about was her name. Miss Damiano, she said, giving him Vince's surname instead of her own. And you can ask for me at this number. I will get back to you very soon, he said ominously. Good evening, Miss Damiano. Because that wasn't creepy at all. She checked her cell. 7 minutes before she had to be behind the bar. Not a lot of time. But there was one other person who knew something worth knowing about Paul Echo. Charlie pushed aside the velvet curtain, took that first step onto the onyx top step, mirrored by the onyx lintel over the threshold, and then down the stairs into Balthazar's shadow parlor. Although weakening the power of shadows for the brief period of passing over the step wasn't particularly useful, the other property of onyx was more so. It made quickened shadows solid. That was what made onyx attached to weapons particularly valuable. It meant that glow mist's shadows could be struck. The space was low-ceilinged, with the same black, light-sucking walls as the rest of Rapture. A few people sat at tables with their drinks, heads bent in conference. One girl had her eyes shut as the gloom beside her did something to her shadow that looked a lot like stitching. A boy with a skateboard slouched low in a chair, resting his head against the wall, eyes rolling up into his head. Toward the back was another velvet curtain. Inside, a pair of club chairs, for clients, were arranged opposite a small beat-up wooden desk where Balthazar sat. Joey Aspirins leaned against the far wall, arms folded over his chest. You got an appointment? Joey Aspirins demanded, louder than was necessary. Balthazar waved airily. Oh, don't be silly. That's the girl from the bar. What's your name again? Shar? Cher? Very funny, she said. Charlie! He snapped his fingers as though it had been on the very tip of his tongue. You've reconsidered taking on jobs. I know you would. Welcome back into my good graces. Balthazar had wavy black hair and long eyelashes, and wore a messy black suit with a messy black tie over a wrinkled shirt. An onyx tie pin was stuck into his lapel. Word was, he used to be an alterationist and had burned up his shadow by using it too hard. He still had the cleaved tongue of a gloom, and wore a silver stud at the apex of the split. He came in late, left early, and often forgot to pay the rent to Odette. He was the exact sort of skinny fast talker that Charlie usually got involved with and then regretted. Joey Aspirins, by contrast, was small, wiry, and sunken-cheeked in a way that spoke of ill health, maybe addiction in his past. He wore his gray hair military short. He had a lot of tattoos, including a few crawling across his throat, combat boots, and a wardrobe that seemed to consist entirely of white t-shirts with short-sleeve button-ups over them. When he looked at Charlie, she knew he didn't expect her to be smart. Well, she didn't think he was some kind of genius either. Charlie put her hand on her hip. I'm headed off break. I thought I'd ask if I could get you anything from the bar." "Aren't you thoughtful?" Balthazar said, skeptical, but not about to turn down a drink. "Perhaps that old-fashioned you make with Amaro?" "Orange peel and a cherry?" "A couple of cherries," he said. "I like a lot of sweet with my bitter." Nice line. With great force of will, Charlie didn't roll her eyes. "And I wanted to ask you something." "You don't say." Balthazar was the picture of innocence. She sighed. "There was a man I saw the other night on the street. He had shadows for hands. Do you know him?" "You've met the new Hierophant," he said. The Hierophant. The magician in a tarot deck, and a position among the glomists. Locally, shadow magicians came together to choose representatives from each discipline to sit in what they, perhaps not incorrectly, called a cabal. The representatives were well known. Vicereine, famous for causing a washed-up actor to win an Oscar with his post-altered shadow performance and having altered or influenced her ex-boyfriend so that his shadow's head looked like a pig. Her gang of artists had grown over the years to be highly influential, in part because alterations were so lucrative. Malik was rumored to have puppeted his shadow to steal an extremely large ruby from the British Museum before they installed onyx, while Bellamy, of the Masks, had no reputation so to speak of, which was a reputation in itself for those of the masked discipline. Then there was Night Singh. After his murder, they were going to have to find someone else. The cabal oversaw whatever adjudication was needed outside of the law amongst glomists, and all of them put in a little money to hunt and trap the one thing that no glomist wanted the daylight world to know too much about: blights. Whatever unlucky fucker crossed the cabal was given the position of Hierophant. "He didn't look very friendly when I saw him," Charlie said, "but I guess none of them are." If the Hierophant was in the alley with the body, it was very likely Paul Echo had been murdered by a blight. "That guy who came in the other night trying to get you to sell something for him," Charlie said. "How come you tossed him out?" "You know why they call this guy Joey Aspirins?" Balthazar cut her off, nodding to his companion. Charlie shrugged. Balthazar's easy smile faded, and she had a sense of the menace underneath. "Because he makes headaches go away. And you are one. You were good, Charlie. One of the best. Come back to work and we'll talk. Otherwise, get out." As she went back to the bar and made Balthazar's cocktail, Charlie reminded herself Paul Echo's murder shouldn't matter to her. His choice of a drink wasn't that interesting, and his tips sucked. He was dead, sure, but lots of people died. Probably Adam was the one with the book, anyway. As she got back from delivering the booze, she was flagged down by a guy wearing a neatly trimmed goatee and locks. He wanted to do the whole absinthe thing, with the water and the sugar cube on fire, and wanted 5 of his friends to do it too. Then there was a scotch drinker on the other side of the bar, who wanted to debate the relative smokiness and saltiness of Spaysides. By the time Rapture was closing, Charlie had pulled her hair into 2 sweaty pigtails and slung a wet towel across her neck. Balthazar and Joey Aspirins were gone. The performers were sitting together in the corner with Odette, drinking pale purple aviations while Charlie pocketed her tips for the night and counted out the till. "Is this what you thought you'd be doing with your life?" Odette was asking. "Oh no, honey," said one. "My mother wanted me to be a doctor." The 3 of them laughed as Charlie loaded the dishwasher. One of the barbacks, Sam, swept up broken glass. That's when the doors opened. A bearded guy in a deep green fisherman's jacket walked in, his shadows in the shape of wings at his back. "We're closed," Odette called, turning in her chair and making a grand gesture with one hand. "Come back on another night, dear." The bearded man's gaze went to Odette and her table, then over to Charlie. "Miss Damiano?" he asked, and for a moment Charlie didn't understand. Then she did, and felt a flush of horror. This was the man on the other end of the phone, the one who'd pretended to be the late Paul Echo. "Charlie Hall," she said, pointing to herself. This was a lounge, after all. People passed through, used phones. She told herself there was no way her voice was so distinct that he could be sure she was the one who'd called. But as he crossed the room, heading toward the bar, she could tell he'd made his decision. And as he walked, his shadow began to grow, feathers lengthening and then rolling toward Charlie like fog. On the other side of the room, the performers gasped, and Odette stood up so quickly that her chair fell over. Charlie stopped moving. The dark reached toward her with suddenly knife-like fingers. She threw herself against the shelves, making the bottles behind her shake dangerously. And then it slid away, as though they'd all imagined it, as though nothing had happened. The man's shadow looked utterly normal, unaltered, no longer even in the shape of wings. "Abracadabra, bitch," he said with a grin, leaning his arm on the scratched wood of the bar top. 7. The past. Charlie hadn't thought there was anyone she could like less than Travis, until Rand came along. He was one of Mom's crystals and tarot friends, and had been particularly skeptical when she was channeling Alonzo. He hadn't thought much of her, so she was surprised when one day Mom told her that he was waiting for her in the main room of their apartment. "What does he want?" Charlie had asked. "He said that he'd been doing a reading and there was something that concerned you. He wanted to tell you himself." Mom was boiling green tea in a regular pot with several pieces of quartz at the bottom, for clarity of thought. "Go on in. I'll join you in a minute." Rand was sitting on the couch. His mustache looked even longer than it had before, twisted up with wax on both sides into a style he called imperial and everyone else called hipster. He had on a tweed jacket and slacks, only slightly worn at the elbows and knees. It all combined to give him an affable look that fell somewhere between professor, old-timey saloon owner, and rich Uncle Pennybags from Monopoly. One of his main gambits was convincing older women that he was special and that they were special through their connection to him. Charlie had no idea that Alonzo was stepping on his game. She also didn't know that Rand was a con artist. "Sit down," he said, patting the couch beside him. She chose the chair that was as far as she thought she could go without seeming rude. He gave her the fake smile that adults give kids, too broad. "Your mother probably told you that I have a message for you." She just kept looking at him. The only good thing that living with Travis had done for her was free her from wanting to please adults. He cleared his throat, leaned forward, and kept going. "But it isn't really a message from me. It's a message from Alonzo." Charlie opened her mouth to object before she realized that she couldn't. If she did, she'd be admitting Alonzo wasn't real. "You see," Rand said, looking her right in the eye, like he knew exactly what she was thinking. "He came to me in a dream and revealed that it was important you help me. You believe in Alonzo, don't you?" Later, she would wish that she'd said many things. She wished she'd been clever enough to tell him that since Alonzo spoke through her, she never met him. She wished she'd tearfully told Rand that she hated Alonzo speaking through her and that he'd taken enough from her already. Basically, she wished she'd already become the con artist he was going to turn her into. But in that moment, she was too scared. She felt cornered, caught. And so she just nodded. "Good," he told her. "You're going to come with me to a party this weekend. Tell your mother you want to go." "I'm not doing any sex stuff," Charlie told him. Rand looked surprised, then insulted. "That's not—" "Keeping my clothes on," Charlie said, in case he didn't understand what she meant. Her mother had told her that when guys asked you to keep a secret, it was usually sex stuff. "All you have to do at the party is tell lies," he assured her nastily. "And you're good at that, aren't you?" Which was close enough to a threat. When her mother asked Charlie if she wanted to go with Rand, she insisted that she did. Much later, she would realize that her mother shouldn't have been okay with that. 12-year-old girls don't have any business gallivanting around with grown men they don't know particularly well. But her mother worked a lot back then and was so busy that having Charlie out of the house for a few hours on a weekend was a relief. The party was being held in the Berkshires. Charlie sat silently in the passenger seat of his car, although he tried to talk her around. He let her choose the station on the radio. He took her through the McDonald's drive-thru and let her order whatever she wanted, which was fries and a milkshake. He told her a story about her mother that was a little bit funny. It didn't make her hate him any less, but it did mean she enjoyed the drive more. Finally, as they drove along a tree-lined road, past mansions set acres and acres apart, she caved and asked him the question she should have asked before she ever got in his car. "What are you bringing me to this place to do?" "You're going to sneak upstairs at the party." Charlie gave him an incredulous look. "You want me to steal something? What if they catch me?" He laughed a little, as though her totally obvious conclusion was totally obviously wrong. "Nothing like that. Nothing illegal. You're going to wear a nightgown under your coat. You go upstairs, third room on the left. Don't let anyone see you. I want you to wait until I give you the signal, then stand in front of the window in the nightgown. And before you ask, it's not skimpy or anything like that. Nothing to offend your delicate sensibilities." He was making it sound easy, but that was a lot. "Why?" He kept his eyes on the road. She sucked up the last of the strawberry milkshake through the straw, the sweetness of it mingling with the salt on her lips. Sucked again, to make that sound adults hated. "If you want me to do it, you'd better say." Rand glanced at her swiftly, as though he'd just realized how big a role he'd given her. "Think of it as playing pretend. Stand there for a few minutes like you're a pretty princess, then sneak back out and wait for me in the car. You won't have to say anything to anybody." He must have thought she was 7 instead of 12. Whatever. He parked the car near a hedge, got out, and fumbled around in the trunk. When he returned, he had a Walmart bag containing a white cotton nightgown and a blonde wig. "Go on," he said. "Don't look," she said, and got into the back where she'd have more room. "I don't intend to," he told her. "And stand guard so no one else sees." He made an annoyed sound but stood with his back against the window and his arms folded over his chest. She scrambled into the nightgown, pulling it on over her clothes and then slithering out of her shirt. She tucked the nightgown into her jeans. The material bunched up weirdly, but it was the only way she was going to be able to fully hide it under her coat. Then she jammed the wig on her head and tried to tuck any stray pieces of her own dark hair up into it. When she climbed out, he began twisting the end of his mustache back and forth between his thumb and first finger, like a villain in need of someone to tie to some tracks. He frowned at her jeans. "You can't wear those in front of the window." "Okay," she said. He was clearly getting more nervous the closer to his plan they got. "And you're not wearing the wig right." "I don't know how to put it on," she objected. "I don't even have a mirror." "Just..." He paused. "I don't know either. Give it to me." He tried to adjust it to hide more of her hair, shoving at her hairline until he got so frustrated that he gave up. Charlie had a memory of an elderly neighbor with a wardrobe of wigs and a lot of bobby pins, but she'd bet Rand had never even heard of those, much less thought to bring some. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, more to himself than to her. She put back on her own coat. It was a pink puffer, with ratty and somewhat matted fake fur around the hood. It had come to her secondhand, via one of her mother's friends with a slightly older daughter. They were always dropping off clothes, all of them a lot cheerier and more colorful than Charlie would have chosen for herself. Nothing she had on was appropriate for a place like this. She was going to stick out like a sore thumb. She was suddenly filled with a terrible conviction that Rand had no idea what he was doing. It only got worse as they approached the gates. Stone walls led to wrought iron bars with cutouts of horses on both sides. He leaned over to the comm on one side of the stone pilings, pressed a button, and gave his name. They waited as the wrought iron gates swung open. "Won't they notice us being on foot? It's weird," she whispered to him, looking down a very long driveway at a gigantic mansion. 3 stories, the top floor covered in painted shingles, and stone on the lower section, ivy crawling around the windows and big white columns flanking the front doors. "Don't worry so much," he said, and pulled her off the road. "I am considered eccentric, which helps me be able to explain anything I do in terms of my eccentricities. Do you know what that word means?" "Yes," she said, annoyed. Hadn't she fooled at least some adults into believing she was a dead warlock? Maybe he should give her some credit. He pointed across the stretch of sparsely wooded lawn that led toward the side of the giant mansion. "Go that way." "Go where?" she asked. He sighed and pressed a phone into her hands. "Go in through the side. Then, I told you, 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. Go quickly, but don't run. Don't draw attention to yourself and don't get distracted. No matter what happens, this phone is not for you to call me on. This is for me to send you a signal. When it buzzes, you get into position and you take off your jeans." Charlie's heart was racing and her fingers had gone cold with anxiety. "I don't want to go in there alone." "I'll meet you by the side door. How's that?" He glanced toward the gate. They might be hidden from the front of the house, but if another car came through, their little conference would look extremely suspicious. "I don't think I can do this." He put his hand on her chin, tilted her face up. "Too bad," he said impatiently. "Mess this up, and I will have a long talk with your mother. You decide which is worse." She shook off his grip. What he wanted her to do? Sneaking into the mansion, playing some trick on the people inside, felt impossible. But losing her mother would be worse. Mom would never forgive Charlie. Not just for the deception, or costing her a marriage, or making her act like a fool in front of her friends, but for ruining the magic. Charlie would get sent to her father and his off-the-grid experimental homestead with chickens and a composting toilet that wasn't installed right. And his new wife would never let her stay. I'll say you're lying. You got your sister in on it, didn't you? Rand smirked. She's still a little kid. You really think she wouldn't admit everything if your mother pressed her? Posey hates Travis, Charlie said. More than me, even. There was something in Rand's face, some calculation that hadn't been there before. Maybe he hadn't guessed why she'd played the part of Alonzo. Maybe he'd thought it was for fun, to mess with people, or even to get something from her mother. Alonzo says you better buy me a brand new Xbox. The spirits demand it. Charlie wasn't sure if she was in more trouble or less. Travis was a dick, he said finally. She gave him a half smile. Not a real one, but not nothing either. And so Charlie walked across the grounds, hands in the pockets of her coat, head down. Above her, the sky was overcast. As she walked, she realized that to be really convincing, she should have put on the wig upstairs. But she didn't trust herself to get all her hair into it again. And besides, it was better for her to be disguised the whole time. That way, if Rand got in trouble later, she wouldn't get in trouble with him. She put her hood up anyway. The side of the house where she'd been directed had been taken over by caterers. They had a tent up and a grill going. Whole cookie trays of puffs and shrimp and other things that Charlie had never seen before were being prepped and then sent inside, presumably to be put on some fancier plate. Near the door was a small stone patio where some of the staff, in their black and white server outfits, were sitting and smoking. One drank coffee out of a paper cup, their breath and the hot liquid clouding in the air. Another spoke Spanish in a low voice to a coworker. She didn't understand all the words because she didn't pay enough attention in class, but she thought he was complaining about a guy who was hot, but also terrible. Even though they were distracted, she didn't dare walk right past them. They would take one look at her and know she was in the wrong place. Her sneakers were muddy from the walk, and they were sneakers, with glittery laces. But as much as she couldn't walk past them, she couldn't stay where she was either. They'd notice her lurking around the bushes eventually, and then she'd have no chance. Her feeling that Rand had no idea what he was doing returned. Maybe she should take the cell phone and call her mother. If she got Rand in trouble, maybe Mom wouldn't believe anything he said. Hey, kid! His voice startled her. Come on, quick! She found him holding the door open. She could see distant movement in other rooms, but no one close by. Ducking her head and not looking at anyone else, she hurried into the house. For a moment, she was so startled by the fanciness of it that all she could do was look around. Polished wood, cream and gold-striped wallpaper, paintings and heavy antique frames with no glass protecting them. He steered her toward the staircase. Remember the job. His voice was low and intense. Third door on the left, a little kid's room. Take off everything but the nightgown. When I give you the signal, not before, you stand in the window, behind the filmy curtain so your face is blurry, okay? Got it? Not before the signal. Stand there for 1 minute, then put back on the coat and get the hell out of the house. Your job is not to be seen and to leave no trace. Charlie nodded, feeling clumsy and afraid. She was sure she was going to be caught, and then he would tell her mother everything anyway. Okay, well, don't just stand there, go! He turned his back on her, heading toward the party. Charlie hurried up the steps. The air in the upstairs hall was hushed. Crystals hung from sconces, gleaming, spilling rainbows onto the wooden floor. Her hand turned the knob on the third door, and she found herself in a massive room, the whole thing done up in pink, with a bed in the shape of Cinderella's carriage at the center. The walls were muraled in vines. Unlike in the hall, though, there was dust covering the furniture, as though whoever had once slept in this room had been gone a long time, as though someone didn't want it disturbed. Charlie took off the coat, placing it gently on the side of the dresser, next to a music box. At the vibration, it gave off a few eerie notes. She toed off her sneakers, too, since they were muddy and there was an expanse of pale pink carpet between her and the window. Then her jeans. In her mind, she challenged an imaginary Rand. See? You didn't have to tell me to do that. When she was done, she crossed the room. But instead of going near the window, she opened the interior doors. The first led to a bathroom painted in pink as well, with a crown gathering cloth above the bathtub. A bar of pink soap rested in a little dish by the sink, but it was dried and cracked. The second led to an enormous closet, so big that there was a sitting area with a vanity. Photographs of a blonde girl were stuck to the frame around the mirror with rainbow tape. Haley. There was her name, on the back of a pink soccer jersey. And there she was, arms around her friends. In another picture, riding an enormous chestnut horse. She looked happy. She looked alive. But obviously, she wasn't. Charlie sat down at the vanity. She understood what Rand had brought her here to do. She imagined what he was going to say to Haley's bereaved parent. Look at your daughter in the window. Want to keep talking to her? Well, I'd love to help, but I'm going to require a financial contribution. Yerba mate and mustache wax ain't free. Inside the drawers, she found a comb, a hair tie, and 2 sparkly barrettes. Charlie pulled off the wig and used the tie to pull her hair back so that when she put the wig back on properly, strands weren't constantly falling out. Then she took the comb to try to arrange the wig like the girl's hair in the photos. She stared at someone who was herself and not herself. She felt a little giddy at the thought of sliding into a different life, of trying on a different self, one that had been loved so completely that her bedroom had become a tomb, missing only its mummy. Rand still hadn't signaled, so she went through the girl's things until she found the most nondescript t-shirt and a bag big enough for the wig and nightgown. She placed those near the door, just as the phone buzzed. When she looked down at it, the screen had one word. Now. Charlie moved to the window, careful to keep the gauzy drape between her and the glass. She expected to see Rand outside guiding the action, but she couldn't spot him. For a long moment, she thought nothing was going to happen, that no one was going to look up. But then a woman did. And she screamed. It wasn't a scream of horror or fear, but pure agonized grief. Charlie had never heard a sound like it. She was glad the curtain was between them. She didn't want to have to see the woman's face too clearly. But when she collapsed, face still upturned, Charlie lifted one hand and pressed her palm against the glass. Better Haley's mom believed her daughter could see her, right? Better to give her some resolution. Something. Then Realizing it had probably been more than a minute, she stepped away from the window and raced across the floor to her things. "Get the hell out," he'd said. Of course, because if you saw a ghost, the immediate thing to do would be to visit the room where you saw it. Charlie yanked off the wig. She ripped off the nightgown. For a moment, clad only in her bra, Charlie had the terrible feeling that she was going to get caught like that. Then the inside-out t-shirt was over her head, her coat was back on and zipped, and she was moving toward the stairs. But before she could go down, she heard the sound of voices coming from that direction. Turning, she moved the other way down the hall. It was a big house. There had to be a bathroom she could hide in. She found another set of stairs, grander ones, and hurried down them to a marble-floored foyer. It was extremely exposed and the last place that she ought to be spotted. Darting through the closest doorway, Charlie found herself in a music room. A patterned carpet and greenish tones covered the floor, running up to a sofa that looked both too stiff and too small to be comfortable. Beside it was a stringed instrument that looked a little like a guitar, and an upright piano. She was not too old to have a child's longing to press the keys, even if she had no idea how to actually play. Instead, she contented herself with running a finger over the glossy black lacquer that covered it. "There you are!" Rand hissed, grabbing her by the arm. "What's wrong with you? Please tell me you didn't steal anything. Never mind, don't tell me anything. Just get out of here." "You're hurting me," Charlie complained, pulling against his grip. But he held on, squeezing her arm more tightly as he pressed his keys into her hand. "Wait in the car." "I would have gotten caught if I did what you said," she told him, angry that Rand hadn't realized she'd been clever, and angrier at herself for expecting him to be fair. He pushed her toward the front door. "Get gone." Charlie took a deep breath and walked out. Past the giant white columns, down the stone steps, she kept her gaze only on the ground in front of her, so if the woman whose child she'd pretended to be was there, she wouldn't notice her and panic. She passed the valets, feeling conspicuous. There were a few couples heading out. She overheard a man say to his wife, "He's a swindler. Why doesn't she see that?" Charlie's face felt hot, but she kept going until she came to the gate. There, she waited for a car to pass and darted through. Another thing she'd been able to figure out on her own. When she made it to the car, she climbed in and slammed the door. She wished she knew how to drive. She would leave him there. Maybe she'd pick him up eventually, maybe not. What could he do? Call the cops? In that moment, she felt very young, and as though she didn't want to have to be this grown-up yet. When Rand came out to the car, she expected him to be mean, like he'd been inside. But instead, he was jubilant. "You were incredible!" he said as he pulled onto the road with a whoop. "What a rush, right? Seriously, you are a natural! I knew you had it!" "Had what?" Charlie said. "You're like me. This is what people like us were made for. Born deceivers. Like laughing hyenas, smiles on our faces, prowling the edges of society, looking for the weak and the slow." And when Charlie didn't say anything in return, he shoved her shoulder. "Oh, don't be like that because I scolded you in there. Tensions were high. You don't have time for the niceties when you're on a job. We're good, right?" Charlie nodded, pleased to be praised, even by him. It made her feel as though everything was going to be okay. He was going to take her home, and this would just be a weird thing that happened one time. She could go back to thinking of him as her mother's friend and avoiding him. She could convince herself that he was wrong and that they weren't alike. An hour and a lot of fiddling with the radio later, they pulled up outside her apartment building. "Here," he said, handing her a 20. "You earned it." "Thanks." Charlie took it and got out of the car. Together they walked up to the second floor. Charlie's mother was putting together a puzzle with Posey on the dining room table. A box of pizza sat next to them. "Glad you're back," her mother said. "It was getting late. Did you have a good time?" Charlie had forgotten where Rand was supposed to have taken her, but she nodded. "Well, thank him," her mother prompted, with a long-suffering smile directed at Rand. He smiled back. Two adults teaching a child responsibility. Anything for this to be over, Charlie thought. "Thank you," she said to Rand. "We should do it again sometime," he said. "Give your mother a break." Charlie went to the pizza box and got a slice, ignoring him. Mom invited Rand to stay and eat something with them, but to Charlie's relief, he declined. A week later, she was out in the street, trying to teach herself skateboarding. She'd been falling a lot. Her knee was bleeding when Rand got out of his car. "I've got another job for us, my little charlatan," he said. "Charlatan Hall. I love it." Charlie shook her head, feeling numb all over. "No?" He sounded amused. "Oh, come on. I'll pay you better this time. And it's not like you really have a choice." She stared at him, open-mouthed. "You can't say anything. I know what you did. I could tell." "Oh?" He held up his phone, with a picture of a ghost in the window up on the screen. "Before it would have been my word versus yours, but not now. I have proof you're a little con artist." Charlie looked at the picture and her heart sank. It wasn't entirely clear it was her, but the figure was her height, and her mother would have known she was out with Rand that day. "But you took me there. You're the one who lied to those people," Charlie protested. "Oh, she'd hate me too," Rand said, still smiling. "But why would I care about that? Besides, you had fun. You wouldn't be half as good at it if you didn't." It would be years before she understood the technique he'd used to draw her in. The quicksand of cons, transitioning from having something small on someone to having them over a barrel. You start with blackmail, a little thing, maybe, so long as a person would put in some effort to make it go away. Maybe they'd be willing to swipe something for you, fudge some numbers, change a grade, take a little cash out of the till, whatever. But that's when they were sunk. Because if they gave in, they were no longer just hiding whatever their initial indiscretion was, but what they'd done to cover it up. And the more they tried to dig themselves out, the deeper they sank. There is nothing as instructive for learning how to get someone on the ropes as being put there yourself.